Hey everybody, welcome back to Video So today we're continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and the day most of you have been waiting for is finally here. The Nintendo 64 core has been added to update all, so if you have not been testing any of the test cores, you can now just update your MiSTer and you will have the Nintendo 64 on your device. I'm going to go over all of the different features in this video, show you how to set everything up to make sure you have the best Nintendo 64 experience you possibly can on MiSTer FPGA. Before we get too far involved, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe. Definitely helps us out. And this core has come a long way from the first retail playable game about 11 months ago. It was Pac-Man first and then everything else afterwards. We went from this to having a perfect implementation of Super Mario 64 in under a year. To say that Robert or FPGAZumSpass has done an incredible job would be an understatement. This is some of the most impressive work we've seen on MiSTer FPGA, and it has been so much fun to follow along with everything. And the videos are not going to end. I still got a lot to go. But if you take a look here at your SD card, I'm going to show you where you need to put the games and what files the update all should bring down for you. You need to have specific files to make sure that these games work. If we go into the games folder, you're going to see an N64 folder. This is where we're going to be putting all of the games. There's going to be two different sets that are going to be compatible and tested with the core, and I will go over that in just a moment. But update all should be bringing down boot.rom and boot1.rom, as well as the N64 database file. So when you go to add the games, make sure you run update all and make sure these files are in here. They're going to be required to get everything to run. You'll see my files are in .z64 format. That's going to work. It is what I recommend. But again, this is not going to be the most complex setup process. When we actually get into the core, there's going to be a lot of different features, and I'm going to go over each and every one of them to make sure you have a good experience. But just make sure you use the correct files, you have them in the right format, and additionally that update all has brought down the N64-database.txt file. Without this or without the boot ROM files, you're not going to get anything to run on the core, and again, it's going to come down with update all, so you should be fine. You'll see here that the no intro and EverDrive sets are the ones that have been tested and are compatible. You can't ask me where to get them, you just need to know to make sure to look for the right ones. So when you actually update your MiSTer and you go into console, if you have not been testing the work in progress cores, you're just going to scroll down until you see N64. You're going to see I have a metric ton of them. I am using a release candidate that's going to be going to update all. I am doing this early with work that we're testing for Robert on Discord. And when you initially come into the core, you're just going to get a menu, and the first thing you want to do is define the Nintendo 64 buttons. Just make sure that you do this the way you want to, because the Nintendo 64 controller is much different than pretty much every other controller on MiSTer FPGA as far as functionality is concerned. And in the next couple days, this is already finished, I will put up a Nintendo 64 controller guide talking about all of the ways you can control this core with new controllers, with the originals, with adapters, with USB adapters, and with snack. Because honestly, having the right button configuration for the Nintendo 64 core is going to be, in my opinion, crucially important. Whether you want to use snack, whether you want to use Wi-Fi adapters, or whether you want to use some USB adapters, getting that right button config in makes a world of difference. So look for this shortly. I'll show you all the different ways you can control the core because it is important. Now as we go over to the menu, we're going to see here that it is very basic, but there's a lot of things that are nested in different spots. You're going to have the load ROM, and you're going to have the Game Boy transfer as well. I will show you that in a different video. You're going to see autosave is on by default, and you definitely want to leave that on. I will go over controller pack saving later on in the video, but all you need to do is load up whatever game you want. This core has fast loading, so this is in real time. You just pick a game, hit the button, and then you are into Super Mario 64 that quickly. And to say the results of Robert's work are impressive would be an absolute understatement. If there's any difference between Super Mario 64 on MiSTer FPGA and Super Mario 64 on original hardware, I think 99 out of 100 of you would not have any way to tell the difference whatsoever. You'd probably have to give it to a Super Mario 64 speedrunner to really know. But the first thing I want to go over is how to save in this core on cartridges that have saving internally. Let's just go ahead and beat an enemy here and get another star. We're going to go from 1 to 2. I want to make sure that you guys understand how to save your progress in all the variants. That way you're not going to lose any progress as you play around with this, because even on the test cores, some people ran into some issues not understanding how the game saved both as original hardware and how it saves in the MiSTer FPGA core. So you'll see I iterated on that star from 1 to 2, and I'm going to hit save and continue in the game. With autosave on, when I then bring up the actual menu, it's going to hit saving, and then you're going to see that we have every option. If we reset now, because autosave is on, and go back into into Super Mario 64, once we get through the title screen, you're going to see that our save persists. We're going to see Mario pop up, we're going to go to our save file menu, and now we're going to have 2 stars versus 1. Make sure auto-saving is on. The N64 database.txt file will automatically save for any game that's saved internally to the cartridge, but for controller packs we have to do something slightly different that we'll get to later. And you'll see here, if you go into system settings from N64 database, it's picking the EEPROM 4, which is a size. It'll do everything you need with the N64 database text file as far as these games are concerned, and that is always nice. Don't scroll around on this unless you feel like you want to play around. Leave it as it sits. But let's move over to Castlevania 64, because this is an instance of a game that saves to the controller pack, a memory card you'd pop into the back of your Nintendo 64 controller, and not onto the internal cartridge in and of itself. I will leave a link in the description below, but there's a site that talks about every single Nintendo 64 game, every single variant of how it saves, and it'll give you a list of the games that saved a controller pack. This is not the same situation as saving to a cart, so definitely pay attention to this and make sure that you set your controller pack if you need to save in that manner, and you'll save in the game. Because you'll see here we have pad 1 types. You can do N64 pad, play around with that, but you can set different controller packs as well. So this is how you're going to save in a game like Castlevania 64 or any of the other games that require a controller pack save. And it was very weird in the Nintendo 64 days how games basically had multiple different ways to actually go ahead and save themselves. But let's move into some other options here just to play around, because you can see on the controller pack you can do on or off, you can set transfer pack and rumble pack. These are things you're going to play around with as you get into the actual gameplay. But I want to go over some of the VI pipeline implementations as well, because there's ways to make the Nintendo 64 core look identical to real hardware, and there's ways to do something completely different with it to give you a totally different experience. So if we actually go in here, you'll see controller pack is set for the saving, but I want to go into video. We can go to clean HDMI mode, take off texture filtering, and now suddenly Castlevania 64 looks like a PlayStation 1 game, except without any of the wobbling textures and warping polygons. It's like a perspective correct PS1, and that's the great thing about this core. Robert's given us so many different ways to experience it, so I'm going to go over every single VI pipeline implementation, how it affects the image, that way you can decide what it does and whether or not you want to play around with it. But if you want a one-to-one real experience visually with real Nintendo 64 hardware, just open up the core, launch a game, and don't touch anything on the VI pipeline side. That is how you get a Nintendo 64 experience that adheres to the real original hardware. But the fun is in the experimentation, and I want to make sure you guys are all set up to do that. So you'll see here we have different crops as well. I leave this at none, but you can crop the image however you want, and you also have an aspect ratio option. There are a few games on Nintendo 64 that will allow for widescreen, so this is going to become important. Things like Donkey Kong 64 are going to have that widescreen option. By default, you're going to have everything to be original, but if you go to clean HDMI, you're going to see everything in the VI pipeline has been turned off, and you get a sharper and completely different look in Super Mario 64. You'll see here as I run around. Do be aware that with YouTube compression, some of the detail that I see is not going to come across, but it's something you can play with. And as we go back into original, you can immediately see the image get blurrier, get that Vaseline look that Nintendo 64 was so familiar with, and just look correct. But let's go down the line here. You're going to see different color bits. I leave this as original as well, and then we have bilinear filtering underneath that. I will zoom into different areas of the screen so you can see how they are affected when we toggle things on and off. Some of these are going to be very hard to spot. Some of these are going to be readily apparent the minute we start playing around with things. D-dither here, pay attention to the water. It's going to be smooth, and then all of a sudden it's going to have a very granular texture. And as we blow into the image, watch that water again as we zoom in and out on the camera, and as we turn it on and off. All of a sudden it has a much more pixelated and sharper look, and if we turn that back on in just a moment, you're going to see just how the water changes there. And this is the fun part about the core. Robert's given us so many different options, you'll see it just change, that we can play around with pretty much anything we want. You can turn anti-aliasing on and off, and go ahead and take a look in original mode here, just at what Mario looks like when I remove the menu. It is smooth, there's a little bit of blurring around his cap and and shoulders and hands and feet. This is what it would look like on real Nintendo 64 hardware, but if we go in, turn anti-aliasing off, you're going to see that we see more of that stair-stepping in the image. If this is a look you like, you can totally leave it on. If you don't like this, then just leave it as original. Original is going to just be defined as whatever the hardware would have done in the first place. And you'll see here with Divot, that fence completely starts to look different. And this is where so much of the core fun comes in, at least for me personally. I love being able to play with these things. Taking Super Mario 64 from this look right here to turning off the texture filtering, it just gives you a completely different way to play a game that you're so familiar with. You may never touch this, you may be playing around with it all the time, but I wanted to explain to everyone, especially the new people to the core, just what all of these different things do. This is Super Mario 64 with absolutely every feature turned off. This is what it would have looked like back in the day if Nintendo hadn't put all of this different hardware within the actual RDP and made it look more like a PlayStation 1. And I think this looks really good for certain games. Super Mario 64, in some ways I actually prefer having all of this off. If we turn it back to original, this is how quickly the changes exist, and this is how different it looks. We're right back to that Vaseline Nintendo 64 look. So go ahead, play around with all of these options, dial in things that work with you. The best part is you can also do it on analog. You can turn the texture filtering off and you get a really fun experience as far as a CRT television goes as well, because there's a lot more blending going on a tube TV. So if you're doing analog, definitely play with these. You can really dial in some unique looks for Nintendo 64. And this is where it came from. I'm going to be doing a video from here to there, how the core got made, but this is what this game looked like maybe like 7 months ago. To say that this core has fundamentally gone so much further than anyone expected would be an understatement. But when this happened, when we could even run around in the game at like 4 to 5 frames per second, we were blown away. But you'll see here there is a debug settings menu as well. I recommend, if you don't know what's going on in here, to not touch anything whatsoever. This is set so that you're going to get the best experience out of the core. If you do play around in the debug settings, it's on you. Don't ask me any questions down below because it changes a lot of things. You can see we also have some other options. You can swap analog to D-pad, so if you want to play with a D-pad for some reason, just select this option and Mario's now running around on the D-pad, not the analog pad. And you can swip that back anytime you want as well. It's so nice that Robert's given us so many different controller options in this core. You can set so many different things. You can use a mouse for player 1 compared to a controller for some of the first-person shooter games. You can do dual controllers and analog swap stick as well. And the dual controllers is going to be useful for something like the Star Wars racing games. Just definitely play around with it. And I believe Octane has a video on this on his channel as well. I will leave a link in the description below because he did some dual controller testing on this game. But it's so awesome that we also have the clean HDMI mode for getting a 480p image out of the frame buffer before the image gets interlaced. Definitely check this out in the 480i games, and I have a video specifically on this that I will also link below if you haven't watched it. Because having clean HDMI out in a 480p image in games that originally had the interlacing lines might be my favorite feature of the core. And of course there's going to be more Turbo core fun coming as well, so stay tuned for that, because this is still a 2-core deal for the Turbo side of things. And of course, because this is MiSTer FPGA, you're going to have all of the different video processing filters you could possibly want to put onto this as well. You can do scan lines, you can do shadow mask, you can do anything to your heart's content. You can make it look terrible like I just did, or you can make it look a lot nicer if you like these sort of effects. You get to play around with this, but of course, like I said, MiSTer FPGA has so many different video filters outside of what the VI pipeline implementation does. You're going to have different ways to affect the image however you want. I find scanlines 95 to provide a really nice image, at least in capture, but of course it's going to look a little bit different when you watch it once it goes through that compression step. But that's the current situation with the current Nintendo 64 core. It is here because I know a lot of you were not testing the test builds, but as of today, you can just hit update all, bring down all the files you need, add your games, and start enjoying Nintendo 64. And it is incredible. Sure, there's a few games that aren't going to work, but we're like 99% of the way there. Robert has done an amazing job, and definitely thank him down in the comments. But if you run into any issues or have any problems, leave me a comment down below and I will try to help. But you should leave this video, go grab your MiSTer, update it, and start playing Nintendo 64 today. And don't forget to play Bomberman Hero, the system's best game. Bye bye.